Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Binden. I'm the chair of the board of Movement on Lawful Race Equity, and the group deals primarily with anti-racism issue and bringing people to the forefront to talk about some of their issues, but also we're focusing on transparency, accountability, and trying to get people to know more about what's happening in our state and our communities that affects primarily people of color and low-income people, which is part of our whole mission. And so today we have with us Jason Whitner, who is also the policy strategist for ACLU. Jason earned his associate degree in human services from Southeast Community College, and he began working as a peer specialist, offering support to individuals in need. I got to know Jason some years ago as he became more involved in some of the community issues dealing with prison and reform as well as social justice issues. He later assumed the role as a peer respite house. And in this position, he played a vital role in assisting individuals on the verge of mental health crisis to find balance to continue on their journey without need for hospitalization. As we know, there's been a big issue in our community, and so there's a greater need for people to do that kind of work. So, Jason, welcome to Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. And my first question always is, share a little bit more about yourself with the participants who are with us.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on to start out with. I'm pretty open with my background and that came about a long process, but the reason I'm pretty open about my background is I think some of us and not all of us should step forward with some of the wrongs we've done, some of the harms we've been through, both done and been through, and in order to shed some light on that there's not everybody should be pigeonholed as done, especially when you have done wrong and been in the system, specifically like the justice system, as they would call it, the legal system, the corrections, prison, etc. Because the narrative often is pushed that, once you get a felony, once you've been in prison, you get pigeonholed into untrustworthy, always willing to do harm, always this, and that's not true. A lot of people come out and with support become successful in whatever avenue they be, but a lot of people who come out and get involved in something that's better for the community, something that's better for people who've been through it or going through something similar, maybe especially like the children. Often it's missed that people who've been through this have a whole history in their childhood of going through something, and then they have all these ways of being able to reach out to the kids who are seem to be going down the same path. But for myself, that's I've been through them systems. My whole life is in Nebraska, so I've been through foster system, I've been through the juvenile system, I've been through the adult system, and the systems as in the juvenile correctional system, the adult correctional system and foster homes repeatedly throughout my childhood. So I've gotten a good grasp of what it's like to go through them systems. And as I'm moving forward, I'm getting a better grasp of what's behind some of them systems. And so hopefully I can bring some of that to the table as I'm continuing to learn with everybody else. I don't want to go much farther than myself and turn this into talking about Jason, other than if you have something more direct about me.
Right, okay. I'm going to go through each kind of like a sequence and then we can kind of open up a little bit more. You know, when I looked at your website at ACLU, I noticed a program called Smart Justice Campaign. What is Smart Justice and what are the specific examples you can point to as to its effectiveness?
Yeah, so smart justice deals directly with our legal system and our correctional system, our prison system. And it's the essence of it is looking for best practices, evidence-based practices that show that people who end up in our system uh don't always need to go through the system. There's diversions from being stuck in the like prison. Prison is not always the answer, although it feels like we've been preached to over and over, always call the police. Oh, people who done harm always need to be isolated or incarcerated for the safety of the community. And often that is periods of time. Whereas smart justice is saying like there's evidence that shows that's not true. And we should follow the evidence because it gets best results. And for community safety, best results is not the illusion of making somebody disappear and we're all safe. Best results is the actuality of somebody going through a system or however it's done and the end result is they can be successful in their own life, which means they are also successful in reintegrating into the community, investing in the community, doing their part in the community. So yeah, so it's investing in people, it's investing in addressing the root causes of crime, pursuing racial justice, so that's as we know, most of our systems are deeply disparaging when it comes to uh, all so-called minority communities, blacks, indigenous people, etc. And then we're looking for, we often say rehabilitation, but the truth is most of us, to be rehabilitated, you have some sort of foundation that you want to get back to. And a lot of us we need a better foundation, a better way of getting back. So we need rehabilitation, I would say. And then for some of us, rehabilitation to be successful in, how we deal with things and how we get back in the community. And then we definitely need the community, which is doing reentry work, which is doing connecting people. Reentry work is connecting you with uh, the knowledge and resources to obtain jobs, to obtain a place to live, to obtain food access, all these things that are crucial to a person being successful.
One thing, as you were mentioning, the other thing is restorative justice. I would remember a conversation about people who sometimes don't even go through the system in some states or places, particularly juveniles, where you do restorative justice, but you also have kids where they don't even enter the pipeline because there are people who catch them, particularly for some, we call nonviolent or some crimes or things that we would almost call misdemeanors. I'm going to go to
Hmm.
another one here. Is I know over the years we've had a disproportionate number of African Americans in the criminal justice system pipeline. And oftentimes we talk about it as a school to prison pipeline in Nebraska. And by the way, the former superintendent of OPS, Cheryl Logan, told some folks that she didn't even like that term. But again, she was from Washington, D.C., and I consider her a certified carpetbagger who flew in here and flew out after so many years. But we can't ignore reality just because we don't call it. But it is a school to prison pipeline because a lot of kids go through the system by having the SROs in there, and then they end up, some of them are really nice SROs. Don't get me wrong, there's some good ones, but there's some who go quick to write a ticket and refer them to the criminal justice system if they do some infractions. But my question is, how can we reduce those numbers from your mission perspective and in terms of bandwidth? And again, I know you only have so many staff members, and one of the issues we talked about is how do we reduce that disproportionate number of families of color and youth of color going into the system in our state and in our community. So, what are some things that you guys can look at that we can help reduce that school to prison pipeline and also maybe deal with that disproportionality issue in our Nebraska Department of Corrections?
Yeah, I would say one of the first things to look at is the narrative. Then, kind of like I said, is our communities are safer with more police. And that's you just talked about, the police are a representative of the police at a school. We don't need people to arrest the kids that are problematic. Before they did that, was there a massive amount of violence inside the schools without that? So the fact that we built that up into the narrative also builds that expectation up into some people. We need a narrative that shows that and support, because I also and we all understand that we don't always get this, but we need more community involvement in that aspect. And a lot of times we're blocked from doing that because they've created a basically created like a tradition or an expectation that only certain groups, usually it's people in uniform, are the right course to fill these positions, and it's not. We need people who are holding accountable without putting permanent marks on your record, without having the kid feel like at the end of this thing, you're just bad. You're just a bad person. You're a bad kid. And this is why this is the type of responses you get. We know statistics show that like black youth are most likely to be suspended. We know statistics show that young black girls are treated like, in a lot of aspects, treated like pretty much equivalent to adults or mature mature, more mature individuals, and they're not. They're still children, and all that plays into this all that comes from this narrative of who should be treated in what way and what the system should be involved in, and we don't need this particular system involved in all this. You brought up nonviolent offenders, and I know this reaches outside of the youth, but it blows my mind that we could have a terminology of nonviolent offenders in prison together. Like, why do we ever need to incarcerate somebody who you can classify as nonviolent offenders, especially in a society where we have 10 million laws, it feels like, to get you that status of beyond nonviolence. And so if I can be classified as nonviolent offenders, I shouldn't even see the inside of an adult prison. And we shouldn't never have something called a juvenile prison just to get you to an adult prison so we can say, like, well, at least we didn't put them in adult prison before they turned 18 or 19. The fact that we need a juvenile prison to so-called solve our problem, most of us understand, probably watching this, that it runs deeper than that, and it's not really for the purpose of solving a problem. Um,
So Jason,
so when it,
let me push back on that
yeah.
nonviolent. So let's say somebody embezzles $1 million from a family or whoever, you name it. And how do you punish or you have retribution with that, particularly if they've spent it all and so on? But there are cases where I know in the Nebraska Department of Transportation, a lot of those workers who had gas cards charge money, and I don't think any of them are going to see time in jail, and they're going to have to do some restitutions or they just walk away. The things that's happening on the national level with Trump, where people actually were guilty of things, he pardoned them. So my question is, how do you deal with nonviolent people who do crimes? What would you offer as a solution or alternate to them going to prison based on what you just said?
Well, I think that's the problem is they don't have no punishment, so they don't mind the system the way it is. And it's it's often people with higher access and higher ability to get to these spots that do it. And then the people who find themselves in spaces who are not necessarily would be seen as that's their type of crime, they end up being the collateral damage to show like we do something about this. So I don't know. When I say there could be difference, I don't have all the solutions. I need more of the solutions because we should always try our best to come up with solutions for the answers. I do know that often when I say I don't have solutions for something, I know it's in the community. I know
Okay,
there's
gotcha,
communities
gotcha.
yeah, organizations and whatnot who
Oh, I
have
see
thought
what you're saying.
about
No, I understand.
evidence-based things. So yeah, you can throw a lot of little things. Like for instance, we talk about homicide, and they're like, "Well, so you think somebody shouldn't be in prison for the rest of their life for homicide?" I know people who are out of prison for years for homicide, and they're great community members. And that takes the mindset of getting over that you're only safe if some people are isolated completely, and that's not true.
No, I
Some
understand
people
that.
are the hardest cases, but with success, with the resources and whatnot, you'd be amazed by who you seen 20 years ago and who you see today. Uh, that is a great community member, a great neighbor, a person that your kid can be safe of. It's these people that are not accountable that you was referencing that are extremely dangerous because what moral guideline do they have if there's never accountability of their own?
Right. No, I agree, and I see what you're saying. By the way, going back to the point a little bit, I
Mhm.
know in Europe they have a more progressive jail system. I saw something on 60 Minutes years ago where they do a lot more to return them back to the community, but also the crimes was even people who've committed murder don't go for a lifetime. They go for maybe so many years, and if they're on good behavior, they can get out. And I do remember years ago where there was a young white kid stabbed another white kid in West Omaha, I think on the roof, and the kid only got 1 year in prison. He actually killed someone, and so their lives way depend upon the judge. I mean, they got certain kind of latitude, and that's when they have some sentencing guidelines that they try to deal with. But we know that doesn't work when you have all white juries or all white judges. And just for example, we just got the first African American in history on the Supreme Court. in Nebraska. I mean, it shouldn't have taken this many years for that to happen, considering all the people who've
Yeah.
demonstrated their allegiance to the system. So I understand what you're saying. And that's, again, I like your point. We need to get the community more involved in reform of our system and not leave it completely up to those who work in the Department of Corrections or senators. It should be, what does the community want? And so it's not, again, restorative justice brings the community into that. So I hear what you're saying.
Sword of justice.
Yeah, and I'm gonna switch up, and I had the opportunity to view your 2025-28 strategic plan. I noticed that some of the nonprofits do not make public their strategic plan or available to community members, and I know that you guys do at ACLU. How is your plan tracked, and who's primary responsible for carrying out the strategic plan? I know your board had input into how it's run as well as the staff, but give me a little background on your strategic plan.
Yeah. So if it's not known, we narrowed down the one of our campaigns is to smart justice. And then we have several other categories that but most of our efforts is put into smart justice, which is dealing with a large portion is the correctional system, the prison system, because a lot of people don't put a lot of effort in that because they have so many barriers up. And so it feels like you're unsuccessful all the time. However, when you look, we could just look at our prison system. We're overcrowded. We're building a new prison despite data having come out from a group years ago showing like this is not how you're going to resolve your overcrowding problem. We're still doing it. It's
Mhm.
going to be like half a billion dollars pretty much. I think it's 300 and something they're projecting, but the same organization that they hired to do the build had did the build in another state, and that other state showed that they charged way more, and it's going to happen to us as well. But the point being is uh, the point to get to is for our strategic plan, and this is part where I'm mostly invested in is the smart justice aspect of it is how trying to work with the Department of Corrections and best practices, trying to work with our local law enforcements or whatever and best practices for them and education on how they're addressing it. And a lot of that, most of that comes from working with partners. Everything, I think the greatest thing you can do, no matter what area you work on, is to be connected to community partners, whether that's individuals out there advocating, organizations doing, the various works, and not being a siloed thing, thinking you're leading the charge on everything, thinking you're holding up the world for the salvation of this issue. But again, I go off the track. So as far as tracking it, we're a small team. I will have a lead in tracking a lot of the smart justice aspects of it, most the smart justice aspects of it with my team and their different expertise and the various impacts they had in their life, and so that expertise of lived experience. And then we're always working on SMARTY goals, specific, measurable, the time management, all that to build out a way of seeing like where has this aspect that we're trying to target what we're doing have some movement in it, has some results shown in it.
Mhm.
And one of the results we would love to show and has shown an effect, I think it's like 2% of the prison population has gone down, is from this pushback. It doesn't matter what the rhetoric is. It doesn't matter if they're just going to say, it's just us doing this. We're just doing this and bringing the population down. We don't care either. We just want us, we know and that we don't need this many people in prison. And we also know that we, the black population, we're the huge, we're largely the target of this. And if we weren't, they would address the disparities in the racial, in the way that everybody is targeted. I went and read, let me look. I went and read UNO had a report. So there's 2014 and 2019. UNO had a report that said we were 5%, black people were 5% of Nebraska population, yet we're like 17 to 20% less access to 20% to be arrested, yet we have less access to community diversion programs. Community diversion programs are those where you get a charge and you go through a certain program and you can get that charge erased, you can get it downgraded, but you avoid incarceration. You
Hmm.
avoid the impact that it would have on your life to reset your course. And then we have, with the Bud Crawford thing, of course, we already been looking at traffic things, but we got it's the Nebraska Crime Commission. They do a report and they show blacks are twice as likely to be pulled over. Uh, we have right now, blacks are twice as likely to be pulled over. As I said, we're more likely to be arrested. Less access to community diversion programs. So it should be no surprise that right now we're like 6% of the population. Black people are 6% of Nebraska population, and we're 28% of the prison population.
It's been like that for a long time. But what else specifically going to is I know you have different areas in there. I saw and looking at your report, you have abortion issues you address in your strategic
Hmm.
plan. You deal with unregulated pregnancy centers, erasure of trans, deal with trans lives, workplace discrimination, some of the marriage agendas that are out there, issues to deal with medical care for people who are incarcerated. I know that's been a real travesty in this state with some of the hideous things that have happened. Even in Douglas County, somebody died a couple of years ago because they didn't get treatment because they were just callous and insensitive, and they should have let that person see a doctor. It was a woman that happened to in Douglas County. And then, of course, as I look at some of the goals in here, I know you're dealing with voting rights for people, particularly those who are incarcerated. And also, I know ACLU for years have dealt with democracy issues like another civic engagement and those kind of things. So I saw that, but one of the things I was trying to get to is, do the staff track it, the board track it, or is it a combination? Who at the end of the year, I don't know if you've been around long enough, but who kind of say if you're good, bad, or indifferent in terms of your strategic plan?
Oh, well, we initially track it because it's coming directly to us. We always,
When I say we, is it staff, board, or
yeah,
board, or is
staff.
it okay? Okay,
Yeah, but we don't track it in a way that's like so like the department tracks their own data, let's say.
right,
And often it's questionable, if they change how they track their data, if they change how what they're going to track. But when they're not, it's good data, right?
right.
And so we do the same is we track what we're doing. We're wide open to the board, of course, but we're also open to the public. If somebody says, "What does your data say?" This is what our data is. I don't have it right before me if you're looking for this, but if you say, "Well, how do you track it and what are you tracking?" We're not going to hide none of that
Yeah,
because when we track data, we want to see results, and you can't. And for those of us who are trying to hold some accountability, you don't get no accountability by hedging your results. We won't get no progress if we hedge our results. What we will ask for is alternative ways of going about it if we're not getting results, and then an input from the community, which is why our strategic plan is
on your
online
website.
because
Yeah.
it came from input of community. We didn't get together and then say like we're gonna do smart justice is gonna be the campaign. That came from community input.
Okay, got you. Well, one of the
Yeah.
reasons I raised that because when I interact with the Urban League, I don't see their
Hmm.
strategic plan. I had a conversation with the director a couple of years ago, and he said he didn't have one. And again, I know they're working on something, but again, dismal incompetence of the highest level of not having something like, what do you do? What are your outcomes? How effective are you? Do you evaluate people? Uh, Family Housing Advisory Committee asked them for their data and stuff. They don't have any feedback. I don't know how effective they are. They've been around for years, but we still have a high level of discrimination, housing discrimination, and they do testing, but again, they're more conciliatory. They don't put a little fire under the feet of people who continue to do that. And also, we have not strengthened our laws in Nebraska because some of these incompetent directors and organizations don't follow through. So again, we can look in terms of why we got some of the problems that's been around for years because some of these people in these organizations don't have strategic plans, nor do they have the cognitive process to make sure it's public and have ongoing thing. I'm gonna ask you a couple more questions. We'll move on. We've been dealing with Moore's been dealing with racial justice, racism, transparency, and accountability. can we apply your work to the local, state, and federal levels? In other words, do you work on all those levels? In other words, I know you deal with legislative issues, but do ACLU do anything with the city of Lincoln? Or also, I know you do federal, but I know you just state a bit, but how do you get into the local level, in other words? Or do you guys work on any local conditions in Lincoln or in the state?
Yeah. So I will say we have several different members, they have different expertise, and we try to spread out amongst the issues so that somebody's not overloaded. And then most importantly, and I'll say it repeatedly, is that community connections, community partnerships, etc. Um, and so now more than ever is a time to try to hit all them aspects, but also we're realizing, I'm not we, but I, being new, is realizing everything is not just federal government.
Right.
And we should see that with what the federal, and that's pulling our attention. And then we look around us in the locals and we realize, hey, there's a lot of these very dangerous games going on locally. So yes, we try to you often see a lot of us in the legislation, which is dealing with state law, but the locally, Omaha, Lincoln, little cities that may have things. There was the first 287G, which is the immigration thing where they give police, jails, a power to detain undocumented people. Basically, just kind of like deputizing back in the old days. And it was Dakota County was the first one to do that years ago, and ACLU predating me was out there, combating that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we definitely in the local level, the criminalization of the homelessness of people for being homeless in Omaha, the community showed out. That was awesome. And then uh, our team had put out a ton of outreach, which resulted in hundreds of emails and et cetera going to local officials. Every part that we can do in whatever aspect we try to do. Um, but it's not always us.
No, I
Sometimes it
understand.
might be reaching out to a partner again is I
Right.
don't want to sit here and say like we went out and did this, this, and this, when often we will go out and be like, we know of this partner, and we get together and then we talk about, what that looks like for the next move.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, yeah, I'm gonna switch up because I know we got so much time. So you were
Okay.
at the annual meeting, and your event was called Power, Purpose, and so on. Uh,
Hmm.
and again, you had in Kearney, Nebraska, and you had activists training somebody from your national level. What was your takeaway from that event? You spoke also, and you had some things to share personally, but what was your walkaway as a staff member or member of the ACLU team?
Yeah. Well, I'll say my biggest walk away is, well, two things is we need to get out to the west side of Nebraska a lot more because that's a population of people out there that are trying to do something and don't feel like they're part of everything because they're so far out.
Hmm.
And then also is there's no small thing that in whether in the some civic education, etc., that is too little to share outside of because people don't have all the contact points to, absorb this or just pick it up unintentionally. There needs to be some intentionality to share these trainings out, all of them, all that you got to the different aspects of the community so that they themselves can be more informed when they move forward. It produces confidence in people, which means, I might know if I don't know enough, I don't have confidence to even take that first step. And also, and that's what knowledge will help do. And then the knowledge will help, produce that along with that confidence, a meaningful way to go about it and inform their family and friends who will carry this on because a lot of this problem comes from we don't get these civic educations. We don't get these educations how to deal with these certain systems and protecting your rights and what rights are yours from the school like we should. We should be coming out with the knowledge that I have right now. I should have walked out of high school with or grade school with.
Gotcha. No, I understand. I understand. Well, the other thing I want to say is that One of the things I know institution, I'll use a medical center as example. Years ago, there was a time where they had these visiting doctors or scientists come, and every now and then they let some go to meet at a certain building and invite the community. And I don't think they do a lot of that community outreach where they're bringing some visiting professors. Another issue you could do is you can record stuff.
Yeah.
There are people who have access to YouTube or Facebook Live, so many of the communication departments keep all their stuff in-house. And so one of the suggestions may be for if there's some aspect of that training where people can't make it. Again, I know as an agency or an organization, when we want people to show up, we don't necessarily make it available online at the time, but we do make it available sometime after the fact. If there's certain aspects of that training we want people to get, and particularly those who are low
Hmm.
income who don't have the means to do that. I'm going to ask you two more questions. We're going to switch real
Well, I'll
quick.
say this before we go, and it's just short. Uh, we try to put a lot of information, not necessarily videos. We do have some videos, but like when it comes to know your rights, you should look up Nebraska Know Your Rights or no, ACLU Nebraska Know Your Rights, but also ACLU National Know Your Rights, whatever it is, because and there's multiple organizations doing, similar or whatnot that you go to their sites and look at that and you'll probably find some of this information because you're right. We live in a digital era, and if we can put that information out digitally, that's what we all need to do so that people can on their own find it without having to look for somebody to come and feed it to them.
And I don't mean to degrade it. In actual fact, that's one of my criticism also is that there are some people who don't have access to computers or
Hmm.
technology, and then there's some of us who like to ask a lot of questions. And so, again, sometimes you have to have the face-to-face in communities. But again, I don't expect people to drive 8 hours to a meeting or 4 hours if they can
Right.
get some of the same information and talk to somebody on the phone. And I do know there are a lot of professionals in different systems, even these big corporations. It's hard to talk to a live body because they're so walled up and just so technocratic in the way they behave that you
Yeah.
wonder how
That's
they
why
even
we
know how to
mix it
surf
up.
it. Yeah, so you got to mix it up for different people. My other question is, many people are not aware of the ACLU. Over 30 years ago, they've had a big thing with the Civil Liberties Union issues of the Nazi Party, and some people don't know that the ACLU actually defended their rights for free speech and so on. Where is the ACLU at on that issue of freedom of speech? Again, we're dealing with all this racist personalities, people losing their jobs because they're talking about Kurt in a way that he talked negative or whatever. And also, how are you dealing with Kirk agenda basically in this whole process? Or are you guys weighing in on some of those discussions of freedom of speech in Nebraska?
Well, freedom of speech is freedom of speech. However, when there's a criteria how ACLU goes about figuring out who they're represented, and resources is one. Like people have resources, uh, they don't need to reach out for organizations like the ACLU to represent them. It's often the people who are marginalized and who are being oppressed that don't have these resources and didn't realize, you know, that they needed them until they're getting targeted. And then as far as the agenda, it goes both ways. If I'm not gonna, there's no need to speak on a lot of it because I don't know. But it goes both ways. If they're getting targeted because they said something about this particular situation that people don't like, unless they're pushing the like go do more of it, they have the freedom of speech as well. Everybody, if there's the freedom of speech to say this, then there's the freedom of speech to say that. The boundary starts coming when the speech starts becoming provocative to provoke people to go do violence to groups or individuals. That is where you start questioning, like, is this freedom of speech being exercised, or is this pushing a violent agenda? And a lot of that can get cloudy how far it goes. So I'm not going to be the measure of freedom of speech. But yeah, ACLU 30 years ago made a choice. I will say that they made a choice based on, I don't know what they based it on, but the bigger base was on freedom of speech. I guess we'll have to go read more deeper into that if we want to get deeper into that. But we represent those who need the resources to fight back
But the reason I
for
mention it
their freedom of
also,
speech.
the reason I also mention it, Jason, is that years ago, incompetent superintendent of OPS Mark Evans with his useless self. And I say that and can document and document some of the useless stuff he did and
Hmm.
confusion he brought to this community as some of those other lazy superintendents. But he actually threatened a parent because they were criticizing something in the district and the behavior of what his kid experienced. And Mark wanted to go get their lawyers and kind of sue the guy for defamation of whatever, of the system, whatever. And I knew the ACLU at the time stepped in and said, no, the parent has a right to say anything he has to say. And that district backed off. Again, they lawyer up to do all their other discrimination, racist behavior. And again, all you do is going to look at the record and see that that came up. And like I say, that was the only time I'm aware of the ACLU dealing with that in Nebraska and Omaha, particularly of that. But that's a big issue. I want
Yeah.
to see if I can get some other input from that. But there are many issues you're dealing with. And what I want to do is just say any comments before we open it up because we passed our 7:30 mark or our halfway mark. Anything else you want to say before we open it up to
Yeah.
anybody want to make a
Well,
comment or ask a
I'll
question?
one thing I'll just say is like, so we're a nonpartisan group. We're not taking sides as an organization. However, we all have our own opinions, and it's often it's it's a struggle at times because you feel like if you're fighting for people who rights are most targeted, it feels like there's a bigger power saying like, no, we don't like you for that, and we don't count them, even though they're not saying it like that they are. Uh, and then the other thing I would say um, is the biggest thing that ever can happen in our movements for people to defend each other of across the spectrum of who's being oppressed is like we rise up and defend each other, regardless of what some of them. For instance, we have immigration happening. I'm not from. I don't have nobody in my line that I know of that were undocumented up to slavery times. However, it's still my fight. Black folks have been targeted forever in this stuff. And sometimes we get mad. I hear people getting mad, and including myself at one point, of why haven't people been doing something about this? Because a lot of groups would not be feeling the same effects they're feeling now if they would do something. But that is not a reason for us to say, well, now they're feeling it and not my problem. But it is our problem because this shit is all cycle. It's all a cycle of like they always need some of us to be enemies, and we gotta all not be each other's enemies when it comes to fights like this, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. One thing I will add is that and I say this emphatically, I have not seen the Latinos in the Midlands bust a grape on almost anything over the past few years. And I've written to their director again, no shade thrown on them, but at some point, the very people who are impacted are going to have to step up. And again, I don't expect the people who are going to be deported and put in jail to always be on the front line because they're in an undocumented status. But those people who have citizenship here should get off the sidelines. And again, that implies a lot of things. Again, I find it sad where some of us have to use our bandwidth or our skill set to work in other people's backyard, and they won't even come outside and give you acknowledgement you've done the work for them. So at some point, we got to do a better job of bringing more people to the table who will get some of the greatest benefits. Because at the end of the day, we want to avoid
That's
that great
true.
white savior mentality that runs many of these nonprofits where they all run in there talking their big, language about this and that, but not going to bust a grape. And again, some of these individuals, I'm not going to mention Habitat for Humanity and some of these organizations, NCAP, where they have the means and so on, but they're not maybe working with their clientele to do stuff after they finish maybe part of their program. So we got to be constantly on that. Anyway, I want to stop there and find out if there's any comments or something coming from our someone who's logged in or anybody there from Facebook Live and so on. So, Jason, this is we're opening up for other people out there that maybe ask you a question, make a comment. By the way, what's the size of your staff? I heard at one meeting, I heard some numbers, and I know legal aid has a much bigger staff, but some people have no clue how many people work in your building or how many people in some of these nonprofits, and so on. But what kind of numbers are we talking? Would you say staff members at your organization?
Yeah, we're close to a dozen.
About 12 people? Okay.
Yeah.
Statewide, okay.
Let me
And
get
I,
the
and I know legal.
that's
I mean, I don't even know exactly. I'm just all I'm just perhaps I know legal aid has staff members in Lincoln. There's some people in Western Nebraska, at least one or so there, and then they got a sizable number in Omaha. And so, again, Voices of Children have their people, and so some people have no clue how many people work in these buildings in there. And again, I know they have to deal with some great odds with a smaller staff and so on. Uh,
yeah.
how many years you been with the organization in yourself? 2 years?
2 years. I'm a newbie.
Okay. Did your position exist before you got there? The kind of work that you do?
Uh, I came in as a policy fellow.
What
I
does
don't
that
know
mean?
if it
When you use the word
existed.
policy fellow, what does that mean?
Essentially, it's beginning position within the policy,
Dealing with
and it,
policy issues. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
policy issues. And then, I came way of community advocacy. Some of the stuff you said, I was working in a reentry organization, and then I had interned with them when I went to community college on the course of I thought I was going to be a social worker. And of course, by the time I was done with that associates, I recognized that all I would be doing is going to school to get a debt to not be a social worker because I have a felony background. So I changed my course. But uh, I interned with ACLU during that time, and then I did volunteer work with them. And then over time, I was on the board. We was briefly on the board together. And in all that time, I got to know people. They seen some of the work I did. I would advocate whenever I was called for, rights and better treatment inside the prisons, and then also the Ernest Jackson. I was starting teaching the community more information about him until the community took off with it. Because I actually thought, you know, even with the terrible system we have, his case was such cut and dry, such a case of like the worst type of
Oh,
ridiculous.
by the way, people don't know what you're when you use the word Ernest Jackson. I don't. I mean, I've heard of his name and I know something about him. But when you say Ernest Jackson, why was he in jail and what was his case so egregious or negative for many
Yeah,
people in the community?
yeah.
What happened? Give me a
Oh,
short
I'd love to
version.
tell you.
Or just give me
But
a
I'll
brief
try to
version
keep
of
it
it.
short, a brief one. But in '99, Omaha resident Ernest Jackson was 17 years old, and him and two of his friends, so three of them all together, were charged with homicide, shooting death of another young man, young Larry Perry, which is no matter what I'm talking about, that's a tragedy in itself that we even have these situations. Uh, and what they did was, tried all three separately, and Ernest Jackson drew the rough end of the short straw and got tried first. Uh, because Ernest was at home. He stated he was at home when he went to trial. His family testified he was at home, um, etc. And there's more to it, but in the end, they use what we call the felony murder rule, which essentially is just you can get charged for first degree murder and convicted of first degree murder for certain crimes, burglary on up, and as long as the death happened, you get first degree murder sentencing, which is life without parole. And this time, shooting death happened. So all they had to prove is they believed the murder happened and he was there. So they convicted him of first degree murder. They acquitted him of the weapon. And I say that because this is '99 and it's a long time ago and they don't always show all the evidence. But when a jury says you didn't have a weapon in a shooting case, they're saying you're not the shooter to start out with. So that has relevance because then the
Why
next
let me
young
back
man.
up. I'm a little unclear. He was not at the scene of the crime. Is that what you said initially?
Yeah, he said he wasn't at the scene of the crime. His
So
family said he
how did
wasn't.
they say that he was at? What was their evidence that he was
Okay,
at the
yeah,
scene?
that's why I didn't want to
No, no,
drag it out because
no, I just want to ask, what was their determination they did? That's all I'm asking.
right. So they had another person there stating that he's seen these three there.
So they
His
used the
story
word of
changed.
one person just to say he was there. That's it.
Yeah,
Okay, that's all I wanted to
yeah.
know. Because it's
And he
like
said
two other things.
he described Ernest, which the description fits the second young man. Said, basically said he was the shooter. He did some
Okay,
other stuff,
so
which
I know I
disproved.
understand now. I hear you now.
Second
No,
young man went to trial, Shamar Cooper
okay.
Ryder.
I don't go into detail. I just want to
Oh,
know
this is the
again.
key part, though. If we're gonna bring it up, we gotta hit the key part. The second young man went to trial, took the stand. Unlike in Ernest's case, where nobody took the stand because they had their own murder cases, he took the stand confess that I'm the shooter and this is why I did it, self-defense.
And they still kept him in jail, prison rather.
They acquitted the second young man because the jury heard all the evidence. I mean, they looked at all the evidence, heard his statement, and a jury who would usually not convict the was like, a murder didn't happen, a shooting death did,
Okay, I got you.
and acquitted him. And
I
then they
understand.
acquitted the third young man on his trial. And Ernest Jack, and that's why I say it's so egregious, is because the Court of Appeals said you can't use testimony after the fact of your thing.
No,
So,
I understand. I understand. No, no, I'm finished on this one. Seriously, all I want to do is just touch on it because most people don't have a clue on it. I do know there's a community concern, and there are certain people in our community that are pushing this agenda. But again, the ineptitude of some of our leadership and people don't deal with it. But again, it goes back to something you said earlier to me is we got some publicity issues we got to deal with. Our local
mhm.
media doesn't do a better job of doing it. This is a conversation. Again, it has ramifications of how the system is racist, corrupt, and also sometimes against low-income families who don't
Very
have good
much so on this one.
representation. So that's what I'm saying is very important to articulate it. But also, Jason, what I'm trying to get to is that there are a lot of people never heard of his name. And like I say, I only know it because I move in certain circles. I've heard people talk about it, but that's again what they've done and talk about it. But again, it goes back to anything else that happens to one of us. Oftentimes we don't come back around. Um, uh, Basically, how do you deal with your national office, Jason, and your local office? I know you've gone to some places in Chicago, maybe Minnesota. I've seen some of your stuff on your Facebook posts and so on. But what's your relationship with ACLU on the national level and locally? How do you guys interact with each other, or do you?
Yeah. So each state has autonomy, but they still have a build shared, basically, I guess you could say, agenda or structure. And so but also it's shared resources. Like another state might have dealt with something. And so you're asking another state, like, we're dealing with this, what do you know about it? What do you have about it? And so it's shared resources and whatnot. When you see me usually going around, besides the occasional just celebration event, usually it's like a training, like somebody's talking about uh ballot initiatives. So you would go there, they're not just talking about it, they're like, this is how we done it. This is, about, so there's trainings in all these aspects that are shared throughout the different ACLUs, just like the different organization. Not always is it an ACLU thing I'm going to. It's, whoever is doing the training when I go there, so I can get some education in my brain on how this system works.
By the way, is there ACO chapter in every state in the United States, or is it just certain states? Do you know that?
It's most all the states.
Have an ACO chapter then?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. I know Nebraska, and I have heard some other states talk about it. I had a friend in San Diego who said the ACU of California deals with a multitude of issues, obviously a big state, but he said theirs focus on education and some issues we don't do in Nebraska
Yeah,
on a
I
high
think they
level.
have more than one ACLU
And
branch
and yeah, okay, because
in
he was saying
California.
there's a lot of stuff they do that I was surprised they did that. He speaks very highly of some of the multitude of topics they work with versus we have, like you say, 20 people on your staff or less, and so they have a much obviously a larger group. And then on the national level, you got people working in the national office who come out and provide their expertise. As I think that one lady who provided some
Yeah.
training on advocacy, and I also had fundraising in there embedded in there. Um, the other
Before we
thing,
go, there's a question in the chat and it
okay.
says, does ACLU have any future plans to do any education seminars in the local high schools? And so anytime we're invited to um, any educational platform, for the most part, I can't say every single time, we go. So I know my coworker Joy has went and presented several times in the high school and then others. And then I've been in some of the universities where they asked me to come and talk about my experience and the changes in my life, as well as sometimes come to talk about other issues such as solitary confinement that is still used heavily in our system, etc. So yeah, we always do. We're open to, capacity can be an issue. That's usually the only issue that would block us from something is the capacity, the lack of capacity, to be able to have somebody available to go do something. But when we're invited to a platform where we could teach anything that is helpful to the community that we can share, We are more than willing to do so. And if we have, and we usually do have some sort of community partner that also has the expertise in that, that if we can't do it, we'll reach out to them or we'll collaborate with them to do, do something like that. So yes.
Another thing you alluded to, you talking at colleges or university. So, have you ever talked in the UNO criminal justice department? Because I know they're pretty white and sheltered and narrow and myopic in terms of dealing with race issues. But have you been invited to UNO to talk to criminal justice in Omaha ever?
Uh,
Any classes in your time? Or are you more in
I
Lincoln then, or somewhere?
well, yeah, I think my coworker been to UNO to do it. I've been to UNO for the TAP program, that Tell the Truth Project.
Is
Been
that with
on
the
there.
criminal justice department though?
I don't know what
Oh,
exactly
who's
what,
behind it? Okay,
yeah, who's behind that. But if they ask us, I'm gonna make time and go.
okay,
Because I believe sharing that, not just sharing the experience of what I know from, but sharing the experience of my life, I believe that can give people a context of saying like, hey, he seems like a person. Well, so does everybody else inside.
right, right.
If the more you treat people like people, the better results we're gonna get.
Right. By the way, I do know years ago we had a program called Scared Stiff where they used to have people who were former inmates and different people where they actually sometimes took the young people into the correctional facilities or prisons and so on and had them talk to inmates or people who were inside and gave them a harsh reality of what it's like. Because sometimes people will watch TV and think it's all this in a bag of chips. And again, as you alluded to, solitary confinement. And I didn't know what solitary confinement meant when they said the whole. I thought they put them in like a dungeon, like in the movies, in some of those Alcatraz movies. And what it basically say they lock you in a place where you don't have any contact with human beings, and you come out maybe for what 30 minutes for a walk in the yard or something, and your food
Yeah.
is fed to you. So it really is kind of a very barbaric way that we treat people in prison.
I wanna say like we use solitary confinement kind of like aspirin or something, which is all inclusive, but it's not necessarily all inclusive. So solitary confinement, we use that. And when you go look at the strict definition, then you say like, oh, we don't use solitary confinement. It's it's any form of isolation, especially if it's locked down for, days and whatnot, that does harm. And evidence proven over and over, research and just tons of it proves that this does harm, all the way down to room restriction for the kids where they isolate them while the other kids go out and play, and that does psychological harm, emotional, physical, all this harm, and that's the practice that we're trying to resolve. We just say it's solitary confinement because that's where it sprang from, is where they utterly isolate somebody. And so we get the pushback of like, oh, we don't practice solitary confinement no more. And all I can say is we practice harmful isolation. And that harmful isolation impacts the individual, and the individual will impact his community when he returns or she returns, because everybody, even if you go for 30 years, I went to prison for like 20, almost a little more than 20 years. But when I first went to prison, the with that big number, a lot of people would just think like, oh, 35 to 50, don't have to deal with him no more. But I've been out like 8, 9 years. We've learned to have long lifespans in this world. Somebody's gonna deal. If I come out horrible, the same people 20 years ago who didn't care and thought like that's a solvable problem, I could have been the problem of their kid who's now of adults. We
Mhm.
want best practices, and that is one of the worst practices besides just over incarcerating people.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah,
Well, we're one thing that I'm always pushing and I argue is that our academic community is woefully not present in many of these instances in our communities with research or data.
yeah,
Like I say, I've not seen any academic papers come out of the Black Studies Department except for maybe one person. A lot of these folks get these degrees, PhDs, or doctorate education, and I wonder if they're all honorary because, like I say, some of them act like they semi-illiterate, they can't write, or they don't do research, and they walk around calling themselves doctors. I might want to call them a witch doctor. And I don't say that to be facetious, but when someone has supported your education to get you through taxpayer funds or with people who've given you
hmm,
scholarships, you need to give back to make it better or use your skill set and not be a deaf mute in a meeting. Because I've seen people who sit in meetings who have advanced degrees. You didn't know anybody. You think they had a GED, but yet they know stuff about systems. But again, as one of my mother's friends, Miss Charlotte, used to say, they're friends of the system. So that's somewhere. We're down to our last minute or so, and I wanted to give you a chance for I make some closing comments. Anything you want to say to the listening audience out there, participants who will watch this, and then how can people catch up with you if they want to catch up with you, Jason, to maybe engage you in some other activities with them or their organization?
Yeah. So, first of all, I just say like I appreciate community more than some people know, which is why I bring it up the most because I don't think much moves without bigger community involvement in every aspect, and that includes people reentering the community from the system and being successful is like when there's that isolation that a lot of people get just makes things worse. And then that includes inside if people are able to volunteer and some people do like that has impacts on lives, including my own. As far as ACLU and reaching out, one, go to the website. We have resources on there. We have ways to get in contact with us. My email is just my first initial last name at aclunebraska.org, which is, at the website is that ending address of it. So it's pretty easy to reach out in that way. I try to be active and involved in the community. I won't lie, I've moved into an age where sometimes I don't want to drive 1 hour. I don't want to walk out the house at times. But I don't try to hide from uh community engagements, community things. I try to go to as much as possible, not because of my job, but because, to believe in a community doesn't mean I have to be on the front line of whatever an organization is doing. But it does mean that I need to show up to support those who are on the front line as much as possible when I'm not. So,
Right, right.
you know,
And,
and so, which is why I'm here with more. Like, this is what you do. You are here, as you said, to bring the light to the issues. And I thank you for not ripping me for not having the being the most knowledgeable member of the organization. However, I will say that the more included people bring me, the more I want to learn about your issues, the more I can start to understand when I do or say things that are just harmful, that I just say, make excuses for my opinion. And also the more I understand of, how I can contribute without uh as you was talking about the savior aspect. And so, there's a lot to that. But to me, it just comes down to community, 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 community. Probably because as a youth, that's just all I wanted.
yeah,
We have it.
I appreciate you saying that, Jason. Again, being on the show. Another thing I just want to add to what you said is I've worked for over 40 some years in the community, and there are people I've never really seen in community agencies going, engaging with the people in their communities. We got a lot of certified carpetbaggers or people who just
Mm.
fly in through the interstate system. But, I tell the story when I was a Catholic church in 25 years, and I can only remember maybe one or two persons from the Department of Social Services, Health and Human Services, who came to community forum where they were not a speaker. In other words, they just came there. And we're talking lots of meetings. We used to hold like maybe anywhere from 10 to 12, 13, so on meetings in a given springtime in the fall and so on. But the other issue is that it's hard to engage folks when you live on the hill and you just look over, you fly out across in a helicopter. And again, I'm real critical of our U.S. Senator Deb Fisher. I don't think she's ever been to North and South Omaha, even though you have a significant number of our population live in both of those areas. But I think it's very important for us to show our faces in areas where people allow you to participate. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about Black Futures and those other groups where you go to 2 hour meetings and they don't let you ask one question because they're incompetent, they're arrogant, and they're dumber than rocks. I use the expression, some people are not that smart. You can have a lobotomy and they can't even understand you with that. That's how bad it is. And again, I don't say that disrespectfully. respectfully, but we have to make sure the people at the bottom have a voice, and we have to be facilitators of that voice through our organizations. And again, I asked the question, do you ever do evaluations, or do you have outcomes? Do you have strategic plans? And you'll be surprised the number of organizations are getting millions of dollars. And some of the staff members don't have a piece of paper with their name on it doing anything. So I appreciate you coming on. And like I say, my goal is to get more light in our community and get more people involved in the struggle, because we got to move away from the I and the me into the we and the us. And again, if we're going to transform this system, we're going to have a uniform force. And as Malcolm X said, our problem is not our numbers as much as our unity. So on that note, I want to say thank you very much, Jason, for being on the program. Hopefully we can come you back again to give us an update on some things you're working on to bring more people to help improve our criminal justice system, which is horrific in the state of Nebraska compared to what it could be. So thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you, Sante.
Well, on that note, we'd like to say we hope you hope us joining in for another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light as we always end. May the force be with you. Baroko.